All right, so you sent over a whole bunch of stuff about online privacy. Looks like you're really trying to wrap your head around this oversharing thing, which honestly is a pretty fascinating
Yeah.
topic. And we've got just the person to help us break it all down. So are you ready to unpack the hidden dangers behind those innocent-looking status updates? And those vacation pics we all love to share. By the time we're done, you'll not only get the risks, but also have a solid plan to protect yourself in this crazy digital world we live in.
It really is amazing how easily we share pieces of our lives online. A photo of our coffee, a funny comment on a friend's post, checking in at that new restaurant. It's become such a normal part of our day.
It really has. But we don't always think about how all those little actions add up to something much bigger. Our digital footprint. I kind of think of it like those breadcrumbs in Hansel and Gretel, except these digital crumbs tend to stick around a lot longer.
And that's the thing. The internet never forgets. You hit delete thinking it's gone. But that information could still be out there somewhere, on some server or in an archive. It all builds up a picture of who we are, even if we don't realize it.
So it's not just about what we post ourselves, right? It's also all the stuff happening in the background, the websites we visit, the things we search for, even our location. It all contributes to this kind of digital shadow.
Exactly. You ever notice how those ads follow you around online? Almost like they know what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Well, that's not magic. It's data collection. Every click, every search, every scroll is tracked and analyzed.
Okay, so this digital footprint thing is starting to sound a bit creepy, but why should we really care? Like, what are the actual risks of leaving these digital breadcrumbs everywhere?
Our research actually points to three main categories of risk: privacy, security, and reputation. And they might seem separate, but they're all connected in this digital web.
Let's start with privacy. I think we've all heard about identity theft, but it still feels like something that happens to other people. But according to the Identity Theft Resource Center, it's a huge problem. And a lot of times it's fueled by the information people share online.
It's not always about handing over your social security number. It's the little things: your birthday, your pet's name, your favorite book. Those seemingly insignificant details that skilled identity thieves can piece together.
So someone could use my childhood love for Goodnight Moon to steal my identity. Now that is scary.
And then there's the risk of stalking or harassment. Think about those location check-ins or posts about your daily run. They seem harmless, but they can actually make you vulnerable.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really considered it that way. So every time I share my location or what I'm doing, I could be giving away information that could be used against me.
Exactly. It's about understanding what could happen.
Okay, so privacy is one thing, but what about security? How does oversharing impact our online safety?
Well, one big risk is phishing scams. And our sources point out how these scams are getting more and more advanced. They use those bits of personal info you've shared to create super convincing emails or messages, designed to trick you into giving up sensitive information.
So it's not just those obvious emails from Nigerian princes anymore.
Not at all. We're talking highly targeted attacks that look like they're from your bank, your favorite store, even a friend. They use your real name reference, a recent purchase, or even something you posted online, all to gain your trust.
It's crazy how sneaky they can be. I feel like I question every email I get these days.
And if you've ever shared passwords or security questions online, let's face it, we've probably all done it at some point.
Yeah.
Well, you're making it much easier for hackers. It's like leaving a key under your doormat.
And don't even get me started on announcing vacation plans online. It's basically an open invitation for burglars.
Right. We don't always realize how easily that innocent info can be used for bad purposes.
Okay, so privacy security, what about reputation? What kind of damage can oversharing do to our online reputation?
This one's a bit more complex, but it can have lasting impacts. Our research shows that inappropriate or unprofessional stuff online can really hurt your career. Imagine losing your dream job because of one bad post from college.
Wait, you're telling me employers actually look at old social media posts? That's impressive and terrifying.
And it's not just about getting a job. Oversharing can also damage relationships or lead to feeling isolated. Have you ever felt like you had to share something online, just because everyone else was, even if you weren't comfortable with it?
Oh, absolutely. It's like this pressure to keep up with everyone else online. We overshare to fit in or for validation, and it can backfire.
And then there's cyberbullying, which thrives on information shared online. According to stopbullying.gov, it can have a devastating impact on victims. Emotional distress, even long-term psychological harm.
It's a good reminder that what we do online has real-world consequences, not just for ourselves, but for others too. And sometimes those consequences can be way more serious than we think.
It all comes down to this: how do we navigate this digital world safely and responsibly? without constantly worrying about oversharing and all the potential problems?
Well, that's a great question, and luckily we're about to dive into some practical tips that can help you take control of your online presence. Stay tuned. All right, so we've talked about the risks, but now let's switch gears and look at solutions. The good news is, protecting yourself online doesn't have to be super complicated. It's all about taking charge and making smart choices.
Absolutely. It's actually empowering to realize that we have control. We're not just along for the ride.
I like that. And speaking of taking control, our research has some great tips to help us navigate online more safely.
Let's start with something simple but so important, checking your social media settings.
It's funny how we spend all this time perfecting our profiles, picking the right filter for that photo, or writing a clever bio, but then we just accept the default privacy settings without even thinking.
It's like signing a contract without reading it first. Take a few minutes to actually go through those settings. Understand what you're sharing and who can see it. You might be surprised at what you find.
For real. Like, did you know some platforms share your location with advertisers? That's why you get those ads for that coffee shop you just walked by. It can feel kind of creepy.
And speaking of location sharing, that's another area where you can take charge. It's handy for things like finding places or letting friends know where you are. But it can also be risky for your privacy and security.
It's a trade-off, right? Convenience versus the potential risks. I guess it comes down to finding that balance that works for you.
Exactly. Think about which apps really need to know where you are, and turn off location services for the others. It's a small change, but it can make a big difference.
Okay, so social media settings, location, sharing, what other practical tips are there?
This one's a classic, but it's worth repeating. Think before you post.
Oh man, I am so guilty of this. There have been times when I'm about to hit post, and then I stop and think, wait a minute, do I really want the whole internet to see this?
It's like that little voice of reason in your head. That sometimes gets lost in the excitement of sharing.
My digital guardian angel whispering, are you sure about that?
Uh-huh. I like that. And it's not just about avoiding embarrassing moments. It's about protecting yourself from people who might misuse your info.
Right. Like with those phishing scams. The more you share online, the easier it is for scammers to target you.
And on that note, let's talk about strong passwords and two-factor authentication.
Okay, listener time for a password check. Seriously, take a second right now and think about the passwords you use. For your important accounts, are they strong enough?
We're talking a mix of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, symbols. Aim for at least 12 characters or even longer. And don't use the same password everywhere.
Think of your password as the key to your online world. You wouldn't use a weak key to protect your valuables, right?
And while you're at it, enable two-factor authentication whenever you can. It adds an extra layer of security by requiring a second form of verification, like a code sent to your phone.
It might seem like an extra step, but it's so worth it. It's like having a bodyguard for your online accounts.
You know, something that surprised me while I was researching for this deep dive was how much data is collected through those online quizzes and games.
Oh, you mean those personality quizzes that tell you what kind of cheese you are?
Exactly. These seem harmless and fun, but they often gather a ton of info that can be used for advertising or even sold to data brokers.
It's like those games at a carnival that end up costing you a fortune in tickets. You think you're just playing, but there's a whole business behind it.
Right. It's all about being aware, knowing what info you're giving, and making informed decisions.
So we've talked about a lot, but how do we keep track of all this information? It feels kind of overwhelming.
One thing you can do is regularly check your digital footprint. Search your name online and see what pops up. There are tools like Google Alerts that'll tell you when new info about you appears online.
Like doing a digital spring cleaning. Getting rid of all the stuff that doesn't belong.
And if you find something you don't like, look into options for removing or managing that content. You have more control than you think.
Speaking of control, let's not forget about the kids. Teaching them about online safety from a young age is super important.
Definitely. They're growing up in a world where online and offline are totally blended. We need to give them the tools and knowledge to navigate it all safely.
We can't just tell them to be careful online. We need to have open conversations, answer their questions, help them understand that their actions online have consequences.
And remember, the online world is always evolving. What works today might not work tomorrow. It's a constant learning process for everyone.
So it's like a never-ending game where the rules keep changing.
Exactly. And that's where digital literacy comes in. It's not just about knowing how to use technology. It's about understanding the risks, knowing how to protect yourself, and thinking critically about the information you see online.
Like having a superpower that lets you see through all the digital tricks.
Uh-huh. That's a good way to put it. And just like any superpower, it takes practice and learning. But the good news is there are tons of resources online to help you.
We'll be sure to include some links in the show notes so you can check them out.
It's a journey, not a destination.
So true. We've covered a lot in this deep dive. We've explored what oversharing is, uncovered the risks to your privacy, security, and reputation, and given you some practical tools to take control of your online life. Okay, so we've talked about the risks and the tips, and how important it is to be smart online. But what does it all really mean for you, the listener? What's the one thing you can take away and apply to your own online life?
Well, it's not about going off the grid completely. You don't have to hide from the online world. It's about finding that balance, embracing the amazing things technology offers, while also being aware of the potential downsides.
Right. It's like anything else, moderation is key. You wouldn't eat pizza for every meal, right?
Oh, maybe not.
Maybe you would, but you get the idea.
Exactly. It's about making conscious choices. Think about what you're doing online. What are you okay with sharing? Where do you draw the line?
And those boundaries are different for everyone. What feels risky to one person might be totally fine for someone else. It's about figuring out what works for you.
This deep dive has given you a lot to consider. And I know it can feel a little overwhelming, but I want to leave you with this. What's one small thing you can do today to improve your online privacy?
Maybe it's finally setting up that two-factor authentication on your important accounts, or taking a look at your privacy settings on social media.
Or maybe it's just being more thoughtful about what you post, asking yourself, would I be okay with anyone seeing this?
It doesn't have to be a huge change. Little things can add up over time. It's all about developing those good digital habits, just like we try to build healthy habits in other areas of our lives.
And remember, this is just the start of your journey toward better online awareness. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those digital breadcrumbs in check.
That's all for this deep dive into oversharing. We hope you found it helpful and maybe even a little bit fun. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe online, and keep on diving deep.